The Washington Huskies reportedly went to great lengths to land their latest transfer, dropping a $2 million bag to bring Great Osobor to Seattle.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your solo host for today, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, not just during the regular season, but here into the off season as well. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners. We sincerely appreciate you checking out the show 5 days a week, here on Locked On College Basketball. Also a reminder, you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music if you have not done so yet. It's a West Coast themed episode today of Locked On College Basketball. We're talking Bronny James. His college career is reportedly over. He is going to stay in the NBA draft process. We discuss what that means for him. We're also going to talk about the WCC adding Grand Canyon and SeattleU as members for the 25-26 season, what that means for the conference, what that might mean for Gonzaga as well. But we are leading the show with the big transfer move of the day. Great Osobor, the big man from Utah State, is following his coach, Danny Sprinkle, to the University of Washington. And typically that wouldn't necessarily be a huge storyline. You're not in this transfer portal era. We're pretty used to seeing players follow their coaches when their coaches take a new job. Players follow suit. Sometimes it's a family affair like Tucker DeVries following his dad and head coach Darian DeVries from Drake to West Virginia. There are a handful of other examples of this. John Calipari is pulling players from Kentucky to Arkansas. We've seen this happen at multiple different places. And so you're not really shocked. As soon as Danny Sprinkle left Utah State to take the head coaching job at Washington, this was kind of a rumored, expected thing. And then Great Osobor enters the transfer portal, and there's rumors of him getting involved with Kentucky. Mark Pope was trying really hard to bring Osobor to Lexington. We saw some rumors of some other schools. Texas Tech was in the mix. Louisville was in the mix until the very end. And then ultimately we get the report on Monday morning that Osobor is committing to Washington and following his coach. And you're thinking, okay, great, kind of what we expected. That's the thought process all along. Washington had some room in the front court to make some potential additions. Braxton Mia transferred to Nebraska. They lost some other guys that were filling. Moses Wood was a graduate who's out of eligibility. So it kind of all felt like it made sense, and it kind of fit, the pieces fit together. And all that is true. But then the follow-up report, which was confirmed by ESPN, at least they looked at the data here, was that there is an agreement, an NIL agreement in place that will make Great Osobor the known richest college basketball player currently in this upcoming cycle. It has been reported that Great Osobor is going to make $2 million in NIL money this upcoming season. I want to say this here before we get into some of the details of whether Great Osobor is truly the best transfer out there and some of his stats and what he means for Washington. I want to say this. Until there is regulation, and I say that as a when, not an if, when there is regulation of some capacity, whether it's contracts officially because there's a union and student athletes become employees, whatever direction this eventually goes, until then, I will take any NIL data that we get with a massive grain of salt. That does not mean that I adamantly refuse to believe that Great Osobor is going to make $2 million next year. He totally might. It is totally plausible, possible, maybe even likely that is a true factual number, and he's going to get paid $2 million this year. We've seen multiple other reports of transfers asking for over $1 million. We've seen some reports of student athletes getting over $1 million. $2 million is the biggest we've ever seen. And I am skeptical. I am skeptical in part that not as much that it's agreed to. I don't think ESPN looked at some form of this contract or some written agreement and just lied about the number. That doesn't seem very likely, but I'm skeptical that he will actually get paid that. I wonder if there are stipulations that he may or may not be able to meet in order to get that payment, blah, blah, blah. There's various other kind of reasons that it's a bit skeptical to believe those numbers until there is some transparency. And I'm a little conflicted in this area because I don't think that it is the general population's business how much money student athletes make. I don't. But at the same time, if we are going to be in an era of complete dysregulation, less regulation in college athletics than there are in every professional sports league by a significant amount. I mean, every professional sports league has far more regulations because they have a collective bargaining agreement, because they are unionized, because they are employees, things that are not happening in college athletics. I think they will eventually for those same reasons. It cannot continue the way that it currently is. It just cannot be the wild, wild west where players can leave pretty much whenever they want. They can sell to the highest bidder. Like, there's a lot of chaos right now in college athletics. That's not a secret. That's not a surprise. It's something myself and co-host Isaac Shade have talked about a handful of times here on the show, but it also means that we can be in what I call lying season. Typically, lying season is like before the draft when players are kind of gassing themselves up or agents are gassing themselves up, or the best shape of my life season before a season starts and I'm feeling better than I've ever felt. Like that, those are the kind of things that I would consider lying season. But for this, like, what motivation does an agent have to tell the truth about an NIL contract? I mean, like, they don't have, there's nobody's going to check them on it. There's not any system or regulation or government that's tracking any of that. And if you can say, I got my player $2 million, that is going to help you land more players. That is going to help your agency grow. Like, there's no motivation to not gas up that number a little bit. So yeah, until there's some kind of public display of information regarding NIL contracts, I'm going to take numbers that we get like this with a little bit of skepticism. Having said that, Great Osobor is an incredibly talented player, a huge addition for Washington, and certainly somebody who should have commanded at the higher end of what the typical NIL deal is. He also benefited from waiting to transfer to commit somewhere a little bit later. Now, it may have cost him Kentucky. I don't know if Kentucky recruited over him by adding Andrew Carr from Wake Forest or Brandon Garrison, or if they just felt like they were priced out of getting Osobor and they decided to look another direction. But Great's decision to wait allowed him to kind of artificially raise that price potentially and land somewhere at Washington where it kind of felt like he belonged all along, because he has followed Danny Sprinkle at every stop. Osobor spent 2 years at Montana State with the Bobcats. Then when Danny Sprinkle went from Montana State, where he led them to a 14 seed in back-to-back seasons, he went to Utah State to replace Ryan Odom, who took the job at VCU. Osobor followed him to Utah State. At that point, the Aggies were projected to finish 9th in the Mountain West Conference, and instead they won the regular season, earned an 8th seed in the NCAA tournament. They got waxed by Purdue in the second round, but it was still a very, very successful year for Utah State. And Danny Sprinkle only spent 1 year there with the Aggies because being able to take a team that nobody projected to do well all the way to the spot that they landed was good enough for him to get some attention from some other programs. Great Osobor was a big part of the reason Utah State had the success that they had. He averaged just under 18 points, about 9 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.5 blocks, and 1.3 steals per game last year. Now he heads to Washington, helps replace Moses Wood in that front court. Mike Hopkins is out the door. Obviously, Danny Sprinkle goes over there. They have now made 7 transfer portal additions, Osobor being the biggest name, but they also had Tyler Harris, who was very successful as a freshman at Portland last year. Makai Mason comes over from Rice, DJ Davis from Butler. They get Lewis Courtwright from Rhode Island, Casey Ibekwe from Oregon State, and Chris Conway from Oakland. They also have a pair of 4-star guard recruits coming in the class of 2024, including Zoom Diallo, who was at one point one of the top 10 or 15 players in that recruiting class. He fell down a little bit. He's number 47 right now in the 2024 class, but still a high-profile freshman coming in alongside Jace Butler, another 4-star combo guard who is 95th in the 2024 class. Curious to see what happens for Washington. Their move to the Big Ten, not going to be easy, having to replace the majority of their roster and joining a new, very powerful conference. But this is a very good start and a great player joining the team in Osobor. Well, moving on to another former Pac-12 school, moving to the Big Ten. We're going to talk about USC because Bronny James, he's done with college basketball. We knew he wasn't returning to USC to enter the transfer portal, but now it sounds like he is just planning to go the professional route. And we're going to talk about whether that's the right move for the former USC guard. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. They help hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to finding the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, folks, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Plus, LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make that process even easier. They just launched a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions, making the process quicker and easier. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We're still talking former Pac-12 schools that are moving into the Big Ten. Here we're talking Bronny James, the former USC guard, it has been reported, I should say, that he is planning to stay in the NBA draft process. As I'm recording this right now, there has not been some formal announcement. He has not hired an agent that makes him ineligible to return to school. So it's not a finalized, official, set in stone thing. But the report comes from Shams Charania of The Athletic. I'm just going to read the direct tweet here that Shams posted. He said, quote, Bronny James is expected to stay in the 2024 NBA draft. The USC freshman has been fully cleared to play in the league as part of Fitness to Play panel and will participate in all pre-draft activities, starting with the draft combine this week. So this may not be a huge surprise. Bronny was always considered a one-and-done candidate because of his father, of course, NBA superstar LeBron James. LeBron made it clear for a long period of time that he wants to play with his son Bronny in the NBA. Now, one of the reasons that I always thought, like, this shouldn't necessarily rush Bronny, because it's not like LeBron looks like he's on this final year. He played fantastic last season. Obviously, things didn't go well for the Lakers. They have some issues there, but LeBron is still playing like a legitimate MVP candidate, which, as an aside, is extraordinary for his age and the amount of time that he has been in the league. But Bronny could have played 2 to 3 years of college basketball and probably still had the opportunity to play with his father in the NBA. LeBron has also backed off of those comments in recent media availability, either by himself or his agent, Rich Paul, have made it clear, like, hey, that's not something we're pushing for. That's not a huge priority for us right now. It's not impacting LeBron's impending free agency. He has the opportunity to opt out of a contract with the Lakers and explore free agency if he chooses to do that. So that's why there's some kind of, I don't want to say tension, but like, that's why this is heavily scrutinized. Is because LeBron could become a free agent and he could sign anywhere that he wants. And if he really does want to play with Bronny, which, like I said, he's backed off of that, does that make Bronny a more appealing player to select in the NBA draft, maybe above where you would normally take him because of the skill sets that he has or has not shown at this point? Bronny was one of 78 players invited to the NBA draft combine. There was a lot of scrutiny, a lot of conversation, a lot of criticism about that. The players selected for the NBA draft combine are selected by NBA scouts and general managers. They make a list of the players that they want to see. That list gets combined together. They pick the best candidates out of that list, and Bronny was among them. I don't know necessarily what that says. Some people will say, oh, like, he was only invited as a gimmick. Like, that's not true, because it's not just like the people who put on the combine who are inviting him, like, oh, this will get more eyeballs on the TV. Like, that's not what's happening. But obviously scouts and general managers wanted to see Bronny. Whether they wanted to see him to prove that he is deserving of being a draft pick, or whether they think he's not and they just want to, confirm that, I guess, who knows exactly everybody's thought. My assumption is if he's one of the 78 players picked, there's enough scouts and general managers out there who believe genuinely that he can be a contributor at the NBA level and want to assess whether he is worth using one of their draft picks on. There's no other reason he would get an invite. Realistically, scouts and GMs, they care about TV dollars and revenue and things like that, and Bronny could perhaps help with that, especially if LeBron were to come with him. But if you take LeBron at his word that that's not something that's super important to him right now, then you're not going to invite Bronny unless you genuinely think he's capable of helping you. Here's the thing, though. Bronny wasn't very good last year. There's really not any other way to spin that. He wasn't very good. There are some reasons He was coming off of a cardiac arrest, which I think is always important to acknowledge when talking about Bronny's freshman season and now likely only season of college basketball. He missed the first start of the year. He didn't come into the season until December because he was recovering from that cardiac arrest. Shortly after he came into the season, Isaiah Collier got hurt, missed about a month with a wrist injury. So that's a tough situation. Come in as a backup guard, suddenly get thrust into a starting guard role. By the time he joined the team, it was already clear that USC was a massive disappointment on the season, but he didn't really help elevate this team to winning levels. He didn't appear just from an eye test watching their games like he was helping them get better. Statistically, the eye test kind of matches the stats. The stats aren't particularly impactful. He played 25 games with USC, started 6 of them, played a little under 20 minutes a night, averaged 4.8 points, 2.8 boards, 2.1 assists. He was not an efficient scorer, about 48% on twos, which is okay. It's not horrible. It's not great, but he was 26.7% on threes. That is bad. And he was 67.6% from the free throw line. That is also bad. He is a low volume, inefficient shooter who averaged less than 5 points per game as a backup point guard on a bad USC team. Those are the facts about Bronny James's freshman year. That does not mean that he is not an NBA prospect. We have seen players have not productive college careers go on to have success in the NBA. Bronny is 6'3". He has a high basketball IQ. He's a good distributor. He was a better shooter in high school. There is an opportunity for him to become an NBA player. But it feels like his decision to leave now and pursue the professional career immediately is probably not in his best interest in terms of sticking in the NBA. Because if he doesn't perform, look, if he doesn't get drafted, he's going to get signed to a two-way contract or to at least signed, brought into Summer League, probably ends up in a two-way contract in the G League situation. The Lakers are probably going to either draft him with their 55th pick in the draft, or they're going to priority sign him as a two-way contract in the hopes of keeping LeBron James. It's probably going to work. Bronny's going to end up with the Lakers. LeBron's going to end up with the Lakers. Bronny takes one of the two-way contracts, bounces up and down between the G League and the NBA. We get some nice moments of LeBron and Bronny playing together. That's my guess as to what's going to happen. But is this good for Bronny as he tries to develop into an NBA player when he could have stayed in college and transferred to any number of schools that likely would have been willing to take him and develop him either as a backup guard initially and, stepping into a starting role, or potentially he could have transferred to Duquesne, was the school that was frequently referenced because of LeBron's relationship with their head coach. That could have worked. Duquesne made a handful of additions already in the transfer portal and has a full roster right now, so it's not going to happen now. But Bronny going to Duquesne, playing a valuable role either as a starter or he probably would have started at Duquesne, a team that won the A-10 last year, that won a game in the NCAA tournament. That could have worked. Duquesne players it's not like an NBA factory by any stretch of the imagination, but it gives him another year of development, a full, healthy season, a change of scenery, an opportunity to be the lead guard. That could have worked, and it could have boosted his draft stock to the point where he becomes a more, for lack of a better word, legitimate NBA draft prospect, whereas right now it feels like if he does get drafted or he does get signed, it is because of LeBron. He could have played another year of college basketball and done enough to put his stock in a position where that's not the focal point of the conversation around Bronny James. It's not, any time that he gets invited to a camp or signs with the G League, or if he gets drafted, if any of that happens, it's going to be about his dad. And let's not pretend it wouldn't have been in the future, because it would have been. But if he goes to, I'll just keep using Duquesne. If he goes to Duquesne, he averages 12 points, 4.5 assists, shoot 35% from three, tests well at the combine after his sophomore year, gets drafted 45th by a random team in the NBA. That's probably not LeBron related. And it's still going to come up, obviously, but it's that questioning of whether he's only here for nepotism reasons wouldn't happen. Now it's guaranteed to happen, and it will never not follow him around. The only way it stops following him around is if he definitively proves the haters wrong and goes out and immediately makes an NBA roster and clearly proves that he belongs there, or he dominates in the G League and then gets into an NBA roster and has already kind of proven his worth. He kind of needs to do that to be able to shed any level of this conversation. And again, I'll reiterate, it's not like he will ever shed it. It's not just going to disappear. It will always be there. But he didn't do enough in college to get into the NBA on what many people would perceive as his own merit. And he's not giving himself that opportunity by going to the draft now, as opposed to coming back to college, looking for another place to play and potentially boosting his stock organically without it happening purely because of his last name. Well, the WCC folks made two big-time additions starting in 25-26. They bring in Grand Canyon and SeattleU out of the WAC. Is this a good move for the league, and how might it impact Gonzaga? We're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball, and we are closing out the show. Like I said, it is a West Coast themed episode here of the show. We're talking WCC West Coast Conference, making a pair of additions to the conference starting in 2025. Grand Canyon and Seattle University have been voted on and accepted invitations to join the conference starting July 1st, 2025. They will be the 10th and 11th full-time members of the WCC. The WCC is currently a 9-team league following BYU's departure last offseason. BYU, of course, now in the Big 12. Conference is down to 9. This season, upcoming year, 2024-25, Oregon State and Washington State will be affiliate members in every sport except, of course, football, which is not offered in the WCC, and baseball, where those two programs are going to go independent. So for the upcoming year, the WCC will be an 11-team league. The following year, 25-26, Oregon State and Washington State will still be in the league, and Grand Canyon and SeattleU will be in their first year. So for 1 year, the WCC will be a 13-team league. I didn't look it up, but I think that's the biggest the WCC has ever been, certainly the biggest it's been in the modern era of college athletics. That will only be for 1 year, as Oregon State and Washington State had agreed to a 2-year deal to join the WCC. There is virtually zero expectation that they will remain in the conference outside of that. What they do after that remains to be seen. It kind of depends what happens with the ACC. It depends on a lot of other factors. Right now, the Mountain West is going to be involved in some capacity. But for right now, sticking with the WCC, the additions of SeattleU and Grand Canyon are a move to protect the long-term sustainability of the league. And it is an obvious, necessary move for this conference. Because if you're a 9-team league, and you have 9 affiliate full-time members, and you know that one of them, in this case Gonzaga, has been looking at other conferences. You know Gonzaga's had contact with the Big 12. You know they've had contact with the Big East. You know that any combination of Pac-12 Mountain West schools that end up merging into a super conference is going to involve Gonzaga, at least in conversations. We all know that that's going to happen. And if you're a 9-team league and you're just sitting on your hands thinking we're good here, and then Gonzaga leaves and you become an 8-team league, suddenly you're in a little bit of trouble. So I'm not surprised that new commissioner for the WCC, Stu Jackson, has been very active in trying to add to this conference. Being able to add Oregon State and Washington State, even on a temporary 2-year basis, was a shrewd, smart move by the commissioner to keep this league alive for the next 2 years and to add some bravado, some big-time schools, some big-time donor bases, etc., into the league, and then to go strike while the iron's hot. Grand Canyon just won 30 games. They're 94-32 under Coach Bryce Drew, the Lopes are. They've been to back-to-back NCAA tournaments 3 of the last 4 years. In the last 2 NCAA tournaments, they played Gonzaga and St. Mary's, the 2 best teams in the WCC. They did not beat Gonzaga in 2023, but they did beat St. Mary's last year as a 12 seed over a 5 seed. They have proven more than capable of playing at the WCC level, more than capable. They will be one of the better teams in the WCC. They will compete with Gonzaga and St. Mary's and Santa Clara and San Francisco. And if for the first year, at least Washington State, all those teams will be in that conversation. LMU, to an extent, will be in that conversation as well. Grand Canyon is not last out of that group, in my opinion. And according to Ken Palm and Torvik and various other places, also not last out of that group. So they are a quality plus addition for this conference. SeattleU is less of a history. I'll acknowledge that SeattleU has 3 straight 20-plus win seasons under new head coach Chris Victor. They won the CBI last year. That is a huge accomplishment for a mid-major program out of a conference like the WAC. They were also a former member of the WCC from 1971 to 1980. Unfortunately, budget restrictions at that time caused SeattleU to decide to drop all the way from Division I to NAIA, where they stayed for 30 years. They finally got back to the Division I level in 2010, and they have been crawling and scraping and doing everything they can to get back into the WCC. It took a little over a decade, but here they are. Folks, this team belongs in the WCC institutionally, geographically, and now basketball-wise. University of San Diego, the University of San Francisco, Loyola Marymount's in LA, University of Portland, Seattle University, the 5 biggest cities right on the actual coast of the West Coast, all have Jesuit Catholic institutions in the WCC. This is where SeattleU belongs institutionally and geographically, like I said. But from a basketball perspective, they are good now. They're not great. They're not going to come in and be a top 5 team in the conference. We kind of just listed who we think those top 10 teams are. LMU's maybe 6, 7 right now. They're probably around that. A little after that, I think they're ahead of Portland right now. I think they're ahead of Pacific and Pepperdine right now. So they're kind of in that bottom range. They're probably similar with Oregon State, which is more of a testament of where Oregon State is right now. But this is a quality team that fits this conference in a lot of ways. They also have a rich basketball history. And I'm not saying the fact that they went to the NCAA tournament championship in 1958 should be a strong reason for why they are currently in the WCC. It's not necessarily an argument in that regard, but it is a fact that SeattleU went to the national championship in 1958. They lost to Kentucky. They had Elgin Baylor on their roster, a future NBA Hall of Famer. This is a team that beat the Harlem Globetrotters in the 50s, which at the time was a tremendous deal. This is a team that went to 5 Sweet 16s between the 1950s and the 1960s. 5 Sweet 16s in like a 16-year period of time. Yes, the tournament was much smaller back then. Still, that is an incredible accomplishment. SeattleU has basketball history. They have recent success with 3 straight 20-win seasons. They are a very, very good fit in the WCC. It's maybe not great for Gonzaga. It's maybe not great for St. Mary's. It's just adding a game that is not a super marquee opponent for them right now. I think that team will get better in time. They'll be able to get a boost in recruiting. They'll probably get a reinvigoration from their donor base, be able to make some more money for an NIL collective, things of that nature. But they're not going to be for Gonzaga and St. Mary's, like very few additions that the WCC could make would really help those 2 teams. Grand Canyon is arguably one of them. And even then, it's only borderline how much it actually helps that team. But I still think these are quality additions for the WCC. They're good for the conference. They're good for the sustainability of the league. And whether they're good or not for Gonzaga, if you're the WCC, you have to be making moves as if Gonzaga is going to leave, because that's what they're trying to do. There's not really any momentum for Gonzaga toward the Big 12 or the Big East right now, but it is definitely still something on the radar. And I wouldn't be surprised if some conversations pick up around that in the not too distant future. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. I want to thank all of you so much who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. My co-host Isaac Shade will be back with Leaf to Lean on Wednesday. Leaf is at the NBA Draft Combine. Excited to hear his thoughts on some of the players who have performed well there. We've seen good stuff about Reed Shepherd, about Adem Bona, about Dalton Connect. Excited to hear Leaf's thoughts on that. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, peace out.